This is the Xperia 10 Mark VIII, and it's either the most nostalgic or the most dated phone of 2026. It's very similar to its predecessor. It packs the same camera hardware, the same chipset. It has most of the same specs, but it's still one of the only phones launching this year with a headphone jack, a microSD card slot, front-firing speakers, a screen with no punch hole. Despite that, there are a lot of things weighing against it, like 128 gigabytes of storage and a £549 price. That's 599 euros. So which is it? Dated or nostalgic? I'll dive into all the details, but first a quick word from our sponsor. And if you've picked up a 128 gigabyte Xperia 10 Mark VIII or a 256 gigabyte Xperia 1 Mark VIII, you may well be running out of storage very soon. So if storage is becoming an issue, you may want to think about offloading stuff, and if not, onto an SD card. A very good place is a NAS. I've been using Google Drive for years, integrated it with my tech edit workflow, but I kept coming up with issues with the Google Drive app for Mac, editing files, having sync issues, etc. And that's when I tried out the UGREEN DXP2800 GT NAS. Initially, I thought it would just be somewhere to store footage, but then my brother and I geeked out over it, and we realized we could integrate it into our whole tech edit workflow, make Google Drive pretty much redundant, and create a setup that was much more reliable. Between the two SATA drive bays and the two M2 slots, you can have up to 80 terabytes of storage, which is nuts for such a small device. Yes, it can replace cloud storage, but it also works fantastically as a hybrid storage system. So when you need that super fast plugged-in access to edit video files, for example, it's perfect. 10 gigabit Ethernet ports means when you're plugged in, it's basically like having your native storage, and so it can free up a lot of space from your device. UGOS Pro is also super intuitive and easy to use, allowing multiple devices to securely connect. And there are loads of clever ways to curate your media library. We even use password protection for sensitive files when sharing with clients so they can preview sponsored videos like this one. Additionally, the App Center gives you access to loads of really useful apps, allowing you to set up your NAS exactly how you want it. So in short, it's been a really great companion as I've reviewed the Xperia 1 Mark VIII over the last few months. But now back to the Xperia 10 Mark VIII and kicking off with the design. And I really do like how the Xperia 10 Mark VIII feels in the hand. It's flat sides, lightweight, 8.3mm thickness, which isn't too thick, but still gives you enough to hold all work very, very well. With its 6.1-inch display, it's also one of the smallest devices that you can get right now. There's a fair bit of bezel going on around the screen, but because it isn't too big, it isn't an imposing device overall, and the benefits of that are those front-firing speakers. Despite being the same weight and dimensions as the Xperia 10 Mark VII, the cases unfortunately don't fit. It's ever so slightly different, which is a shame if you're upgrading from that phone. The body is plastic, there's IP65-68 water and dust resistance, and Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the front. It has quite a velvety finish around the back, and everything is matte. It does attract fingerprints pretty readily, even in this lighter color, but I still am a fan. You can pick it up in 3 colors: frozen white, frosted gray, or misty lilac. I've got the white version, which has a kind of blue tint to it. Around the device, you can see the 3.5mm headphone jack is up top, and at the bottom is a USB-C port. On the right side, you've got buttons: volume, power button, which doubles up as a fingerprint scanner. It's relatively responsive this time around. And you also have a camera button. It's single stage, not 2-stage, unfortunately. And it can also double up as a shortcut button for screen recordings. On the left side is where you have that SIM slot and microSD card slot, and all you need to pull it out is a fingernail. Around the back, the camera hardly protrudes at all. And that could be quite a nice thing for people who are sick of overbearing camera bumps. And generally speaking, I'd say the design is one of the best things about it. Despite being plastic, it doesn't feel cheap, and I think it looks really cute. The screen is one area the X Mark 8 has been upgraded over its predecessor. It's roughly 50% brighter for improved outdoor viewing, and it also has a color temperature sensor, so it's able to adapt to the ambient environment. And I will say, you do notice a difference side by side with last year's model. It's a Full HD Plus panel with a 120 Hz refresh rate. It isn't on by default, so you have to switch that on, otherwise you'll have to settle for 60 Hz, and it's an OLED panel for those deep inky blacks and punchy colors. Generally speaking, I was happy with the screen. I wasn't blown away by it, but there's a fair bit of customization in the settings, and my content looked nice and poppy. Bookending the screen are the speakers, and that's another area that's been improved year on year. And you've got louder audio, 15% louder and 30% more bass. Side by side, you do notice the difference. It isn't in your face super clear, but when you really listen for it, you'll notice it's less thin than its predecessor. The sound is just a bit fuller. And as you can see in the side by side, while the average volume was similar across both, the peak was greater on the X Mark 8. So yes, the speakers are great for a phone at this price, but what you also have is that headphone jack. You have that microSD card slot. You can whack FLAC files here. There's support for high-res audio as well. So I'm already painting the picture that the X Mark 8 is a really good phone for enjoying multimedia, but is it a good phone for capturing it? Around the back, you've got the exact same camera hardware setup from last year, and the front with that selfie camera. That's 50 megapixel primary camera, 1/1.56 inch size sensor. There's OIS, but when you look at the ultra wide, there isn't even autofocus. It's a tiny 1/3 inch sensor, and it's 13 megapixels. Flip to the front and it gets even worse. An 8 megapixel 1/4 inch sensor selfie snapper with obviously no autofocus. And as a result, the package isn't fantastic, but the primary camera is at least decent for photos and videos. The ultra wide does a good job of photos in great lighting, but gets soft very quickly and drops the ball with video. And the selfie camera, it's a very similar story. Now, this is one area that argument of nostalgic versus dated creeps in, because actually the photos from this phone felt very kind of like 2015, and not necessarily in a bad way. I do prefer Sony's processing to Samsung on the Galaxy A57 5G. Out of the camera, whether the photos were grainy or not, they did kind of have a vibe to them, which I wasn't hating, especially that primary camera. And colors typically looked really solid across cameras. When the lights drop, leaning on the primary camera definitely meant you could give that night mode the best chance to work and pull out a usable shot, even at up to 2x zoom if you are holding your hand steady. The ultra wide is blurry, it is grainy, but again, if you quite like the idea of that look, it's gonna give it to you. What's also worth noting is if you want a phone where you're gonna have to use the flash, and flash photography is kind of like, I don't know, really popular right now, this is one of those phones. So I had to lean on the flash to capture a shot, and it created a picture I wouldn't typically take on another phone that had a stronger camera hardware. But you also do get a less kind of processed, AI cleaned up aesthetic, which I know a lot of people are going for right now. That extends to video as well. You haven't got the best dynamic range here, blown out highlights even from that primary camera, and a lack of detail in the shadows. But once again, that is an old school kind of vibe aesthetic. You can capture 4K from that primary camera at up to 30 frames per second. The ultra wide and front camera cap out at full HD. I like how Sony manages colors, which is why even the selfie camera with its low spec produces attractive photos in good lighting. However, when the lights drop, you'll either be taking a very dark selfie or you'll be relying on the front flash, which is going to create a very stark photo. One thing that's a little bit less dated is the future-proofing within reason. This phone launches with Android 16, and Sony promises 4 years of OS updates, 6 years of security updates, which is respectable at the price. The interface feels very familiar. It's a very kind of stock feeling version of Android. You do have some Sony features. There's Side Sense, which gives you quick access to your favorite apps and split screen multitasking from the side near where the power button is. And there's a new feature called Rewards and Pay, which you can access with a double tap of the power button. Now, this is really basic. It's effectively a shortcut to a folder that has big icons. It's got Google Wallet in there by default, but you can add any app you like, whether it's a store card or even a non-payment app, a rewards app, or just a shortcut to Spotify, for example. So I don't know why it's necessarily called Rewards and Pay. I guess that has more of a ring to it than big app icon shortcuts. Still, it is handy. I used it more than I thought I would. And obviously, because there's NFC on here, there's tap to pay as well. That means the software experience is virtually unchanged from the X Mark 7 and the X Mark 6 and 5 and you get the idea. Sony doesn't really like to mess about too much, but again, in an age where people are like getting really fed up with a lot of AI stuff, there is none of that here. Just Google Gemini and Google features and apps. So that again could be seen as a good thing. One thing you'll really struggle to justify, especially at the £549, €599 price, is the chipset and storage. A Snapdragon 6 Gen 3 is very, very basic. Again, same as last year's model. And therefore, this won't be a gaming powerhouse, which is a real shame with that screen and those front speakers. Could have worked really, really nicely for gaming. And that 1 to 8 gigabytes of storage, you'll hardly fit any games on here. Even if you do have an SD card, apps need to be installed onto internal storage. So that means Xperia X Mark 8 is only suited to fair weather gamers. Anyone more serious will want to look at a Poco phone. Despite the chipset, I definitely noticed that this phone ran smoother than its predecessor. Sony's included 6 gigabytes of virtual RAM to help things along, and I'm sure year on year there's also some other optimizations that have contributed to that smoothness. That 6 gigabytes of virtual RAM is being pulled from user available storage. You're left with less than 90 gigabytes for your WhatsApp backups, your games, your applications, and despite the promise of 6 years of security updates, it's going to be a real question whether 1 to 8 gigabytes will see you through all that time. I have got a little bit more faith in the battery. It's 5,000 milliamps, which isn't huge, but with a 6.1-inch display and that 6 Gen 3, the needs are modest. Therefore, Sony's claim of 2 days is realistic if you're using the phone modestly. I took it to a festival and I captured a lot of content and I used it as a hotspot. And when I got home that evening, I was around 75% down. So it isn't going to last you 2 days if you're going to use it heavily, but still, it's a solid battery. Also 30 minutes of Netflix playback at 50%, dropped it by just under 4%, which again is respectable. Charging is slow. There's no wireless charging, which is a shame. And if you want a full charge plugged in, it'll take an hour and 50 minutes, roughly, maybe a little bit less, but still, that is not great. However, Sony does always say it focuses on battery health, so you should get 4 years of good, solid, quality battery life from this thing, and the slow charging is part and parcel of that. Obviously, this being a Sony phone, there is no cable and there is no charger in the box. And so after almost 5 days with the Xperia X Mark 8, do I think it is nostalgic or dated? It is quite obviously both. There are very, very dated elements in here. In a year of memory price hikes, I'm not surprised Sony basically launched an Xperia X Mark 7S with this phone, but there are also a lot of things that are really attractive, like that headphone jack, front-firing speakers, which are louder, and the display, which is definitely better, especially outdoors for navigation, etc. The software enhancements are charming, rewards and pay, etc., but they're not going to be game-changing, so you could well be better off picking up last year's Xperia X Mark 7 if you don't mind slightly less volume from the speakers and a less bright display and less years of software updates. But if you want the very latest in the 10 series and a 3.5mm headphone jack, a kind of like retro aesthetic from the cameras that comes from inferior hardware, but still Sony's processing isn't bad by any means, especially compared to Samsung when it comes to color management and that removable storage, the X Mark 8 could scratch your itch. If you find it at a good price, even better. At £549 though, it is definitely punchy. What do you think of the Xperia 10 Mark 8? Dated or nostalgic? Let me know with a comment. If you like this video, please do click that thumbs up button, subscribe to Tech Edit, stay on top of everything that we do. It is where tech gets a more inclusive edit. And if you want to see some pretty good looking pictures of this phone, head over to Instagram and follow us there as well. Have a wonderful day.